Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to a quick discussion on RNG. Three dirty letters that have a tendency to make a lot of people mad whenever we're talking about, well, any game with a random aspect to it, which is basically going to be all of them. But RNG is one of those things that's often misunderstood as a contrivance to try to make, the game slightly harder for, this, that, or the other reason, or, trying to make it, so that you're forced into this particular thing or another. The arguments vary, frankly. They're all over the dang place. But I wanted to make a quick point here as far as RNG is concerned, that it is more of a language than a barrier to your fun. So, effectively, what RNG is there for is similar to many other tools that are available when a developer is going and making a game. Essentially, it's something there to tell you what's important and what isn't. It's essentially one way of the dev basically just telling you right from the get-go, this stuff is reliable, this stuff is maybe less reliable, maybe consider using this one thing, maybe consider using this other thing. Essentially, when whenever somebody's going and making a game and what have you, there's obviously going to be a lot of difficulty in conveying your actual mechanics. If you make a large, text dump of absolutely how everything works, nobody's going to read that thing. It is a very, valiant effort, and good on you for doing so. But realistically speaking, anybody that's ever played Vagrant Story, please just be honest. You never read that tutorial. They went out of their way to just go explain the nitty-gritty of so many different mechanics, and nobody read it because it's, difficult to digest. Or if, for example, you go and put a long tutorial at the very front, in many cases, many players might feel that they're being babied to and will essentially resent you for it. So, trying to figure out a good way to convey your mechanics is often difficult, and especially a way that consistently reminds people of how good those mechanics can potentially be. So, essentially, we're talking about cases where you want to constantly remind a player what's important, you want to keep them progressing forward in the game so they don't get stuck. And again, you just got to keep re-adding that same thought in their head of what's important and what isn't. And RNG is one of those potential tools that's available to the developer there. So, for example, let's take a comparison between a Tactics Ogre and a Final Fantasy Tactics, right? This is one that I've seen somebody go on a big dramatic Discord rant about before, about how this is a quote-unquote RNG board and all of your power comes from cards, and your basic attacks are totally so much worse because way back in the day, they trusted you to miss attacks and, you clearly only rely on your basic melee attacks. And this already, if you're familiar with it, you may have potentially seen this argument come up yourself. That's going to be a case where somebody has a lot of stacking misunderstandings of the system itself. Because, frankly, there's so many things that typically go on in TRPGs and roguelikes and things like that, that it can be very, very difficult to convey, which is why many of the more technical roguelikes actually have a tendency to get reputations for being simplistic, because in many cases they're trying to get people to figure out these things organically so that the lessons stick. So, for example, while the elemental thing, for Tactics Ogre Reborn isn't something that ended up being immediately obvious to most of us when going and starting off the game for the first time, when you learned it, that lesson stuck, right? It was one of those cases where, once you figured out kind of what the important stuff was here, you had a tendency to kind of remember that stuff because you figured it out on your own. And it's actually something that I saw with my son recently, which we'll get into that story for just a second. I just want to finish off real quick talking about what we were saying earlier about Final Fantasy Tactics, where in that case, many of your big multipliers for your attacks are actually coming from the fact that you're taking your basic attack, your normal, physical, plus your weapon and all of that, and then you're combining that together with something like an attack up, or a double attack, or a Zodiac bonus, or something like that. So effectively, what the Reborn system was putting a lot of that weight on the Zodiac bonus instead, converting it into the already existing elements, and essentially creating a situation where instead of your units having some oddly specific, coordination between them that you couldn't understand, instead it was a situation where it was a clear one beats another Pokemon style, but instead of pure random chance, it was a situation where you knew ahead of time who was what, and you could prepare accordingly due to the colors on the screen. Now, How does this involve RNG in any way whatsoever? This is a set thing. Well, this is what I like to call more of a situational randomness, because you don't know where they're going to wind up in most situations. But on top of this, there's another element to it as well, because the chances for your attack to miss back in FFT are basically equivalent to positioning in Tactics Ogre, which again, I know, bear with me. But like in FFT, you just basically had a chance to miss. You had a dodge chance and everything else. Your basic attacks in Tactics Ogre aren't too different, being a situation where they're able to be parried at any time, unless they're a finisher, because the finishers are the real like actual damage of, like, let's say your melee attacks, right? Finishers and magic attacks are the two best forms of damage in this game, and they're two things that cannot be parried. All right. When it comes to this right here, like you see, he's got a big elemental bonus versus this guy, therefore most of his bar just got deleted. Sure, he has one physical card, but he didn't need to rely on them, and realistically it still would have been about 900 without that card. It's the big breakthrough that's multiplying the numbers here, it's not necessarily the actual thing itself. On the flip side, it's actually created a completely different value when it came to other attacks here in terms of RNG, because there were ways to guarantee other types of attacks in this game as well. Now, this was another concept that was very difficult for them to actually convey in this game. Essentially, a mechanic that they had put in where every 100% chance hit move has a chance, well, has a 100% chance to inflict its debuff. There's not that many debuff weapons, however, there's two moves, Vigorous Attack and Eagle Eye. They're automatic. There's something fancy they wouldn't necessarily know how to use at the time. They seem like a clear upgrade for skills that you would have used at the time, like Back Attack. You have the free slots available at this point, so you're probably going to use them. And at around the same time, Crafting is introduced, which has many of these debuff weapon variants. It's still not perfect, it's still not directly signposting it, but it still is far more likely that somebody will accidentally discover this. This is a mechanic that, for context, back in the PSP version, existed, but was something that I personally did not know whatsoever existed in almost a decade of playing the damn thing, until the One Vision mod came along. They added an insta-kill effect as a secondary effect, and I just happened to be using a 100% hit chance move that was being tested on the Necromancer class in that mod. If it wasn't for that, I probably never would have figured it out in that version. I have seen several people, since this version came out, accidentally find out that this was a mechanic. They still have that same thing of assuming, whether it was damage related, but as soon as you see, something like, say, a Dragon Fang doing 1 damage and guaranteed poison, that suddenly just really opens up those possibilities of, like, wait a minute, I can just have this guy bait attacks. I can have him set up with a short bow that gives counterattacks, because we've used the long bows to convey that, counterattacks are something that they can attach to bows, and this random chance is now a guaranteed chance over here. This is important. This is a useful, counter poison thing, given how beefy these, endgame units are. There's a hell of a lot of potential on meat on these guys, and this just gives us a solid way to counter that. In this case, his skill wasn't active. I was just kind of going for the dramatic stab, just kind of because, but still. The idea is that you can just kind of create these automated systems. But at the same time, when it comes to the RNG in this one, in this case the cards and the auto skills, you can still have complete control over that. You saw me do some of that earlier, where if there are props on the map, you can just go ahead and throw a rock, and there is a solid, really high chance that this is going to be a skill card. The majority of cards that spawn, and again, you can spawn anything by just breaking anything. The majority of cards that spawn are going to be skill cards, which means that, once again, you start off a little bit slower, but you do have this guarantee that's potentially available to you, which essentially just opens up those options to allow this mentality of understanding that you can control the randomness, that everything is entirely in your hands, that this isn't just simply RNG. It's, it's one of those big discovery moments, and as soon as that clicks, that's usually when I've seen folks going and sticking with this game in the long term. I'm just like, yeah, that just feels incredible to pull off once you're understanding how those systems work, like once you're understanding how to combine it all. So, anyways, so essentially what the RNG was nudging us for in those cases is to let us know that those mechanics exist. So, either way, you love to see that kind of stuff actually pay off for once. Again, organic design is something that's incredibly difficult for devs to pull off, and this is by no means like a perfect example of it. This is just the one that's in front of me right now. But again, with something like Battle Brothers, with them starting off with a spear and shield guy, they're letting you know, hey, you know, you don't have to worry about taking those dice rolls. Those dice rolls are unreliable. But if you decide to take this the shield guy and you decide to put him in front, and then you put out his spear, he's not getting terribly tired, but he's also going to be deterring several units from, for example, getting close to your ranged unit, or might potentially curve around that spear that they're using in order to go and set themselves up for the big spin to win move that the axe guy has. Essentially, again, organic design informing you of what is useful and what's important. So I really love Battle Brothers for that particular one. Sorry, the weather is incredibly dry outside. We just finally had our big first heavy snow of the year, and it's oh, you hate to see it. You hate to see it. It sucks. Anyway, yeah. Name a more sucky combination than just existence and snow. Anyway, so anyways, most you know, developments will end up going and trying to convey that information as best they can. It's a very difficult message to get across, but they will tell you that that's a thing. In the case of going back to Final Fantasy Tactics there, essentially they also give you guaranteed hit moves. It's something that they did for the TA games as well, that they will give you guarantees, because sometimes the guarantees are those little cherry taps that you need in order to actually finish somebody off. The big damage comes from those big swings, and again, that's just part and parcel with that system. It's just how that one works. They will have some units that are more guaranteed. For the most part, you can get most of your attacks more or less guaranteed by flanking, and, you know, that's fascinating in its own right. On the flip side, actually, speaking of flanking, we can talk about XCOM EU, where its randomness is, again, a completely different situation, where if you ever see a player getting frustrated at XCOM EU, more often than not, it'll be something like, well, all my hit odds are total bullshit, I ran into them, I couldn't get a flank because they were too far away, and I had to take these 65% or 45% or 25% dice rolls, and this game is nothing but RNG bullshit. And, like, you've seen that plenty of times, I'm certain. It's something we've all seen. It's something that always tends to come up with that game. Because when it comes to actually understanding the RNG in that particular case, it can be a very, very odd duck. Because the RNG is, again, telling you, these shots, they suck. They are unreliable. You shouldn't be taking shots on units in full cover. This is, like, it's directly in front of you. Don't do that. Like, it's directly right there for you not to do that thing. It is a bad idea. Don't do it. But again, you know, people will see, like, oh, this is my only option, and not consider the alternatives. But this is, again, like, the benefit of going and approaching RNG as a language, because it's telling you, don't go attempt to take these types of attacks. They're unlikely to succeed. If, for example, you were to get all of your units out of line of sight, then the other guys wouldn't have the means to go attack you, because usually the argument immediately follows of, you know, I need to, if I didn't do this, then they would get shots on me, and they definitely would land. Like, no. Instead of putting them on the edge of the bookshelf and hoping for an Overwatch shot, put them inside the bookshelf. Force the AI to then circle around the entire map to go get near them, you know? Create these situations where essentially they have to take those long movements because they can't see you, or those cases where you use a hunker down to make sure that they cannot crit. In almost all situations I've seen somebody making that argument, they have not even seen that the hunker down skill exists. Or, for example, if you were to actually get a flank and get in close range, this creates a situation where they will almost always have 100% hit odds in the early game. Additionally, if you're playing on anything other than Impossible, you already have a guaranteed hit move in your grenades that will guaranteed be able to kill off those enemies. Again, these guarantees are something that has evolved over time in terms of development and, well, in terms of just overall game design and what have you. They've varied in their usefulness, they've varied in all kinds of different ways, but overall it's something that has improved over time. It's something that has become ingrained in sort of the psyche of a lot of these games, that these guarantees are always going to be there, that you're never truly going to be without options, that the RNG is gently nudging you towards where you should be. And this isn't even just like video game design either. For example, recently I was going and playing a game of Uno Quattro with my two of my kids. The youngest is currently not really old enough to going and repeatedly winning in this game, right? She ends up going and getting 3 wins in a row, and my son's getting extremely frustrated by this. Like, he is fuming at this point. So essentially, what we've seen is that she was going and repeatedly getting these how do I describe this game? It's kind of like Connect 4 in a way. So essentially, you either get 4 of the same color, 4 of the same number, or like a sequential sequence of numbers. Though I will say, technically, the sequence of numbers is not in the rules. I just wanted to give them another way to potentially win, because, you want to give kids those win options. So anyway, so he's very mad at this game at this point, because she has gone and she's gotten a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Essentially, there was a 1, a 3, a 4, and a 5 that were all lined up. He had his turn. He, gets extremely flustered. He's like, I can't win. This game is just random. It's just random. It's not nice. I don't like it. Okay, so what's the problem? Like, well, I don't have the number that I need to win. Okay, no, you don't. You have like a 3, and a 5, right? So, don't have the number to win. That's a bummer. But why are you saying that you can't win? It's like, well, I don't have a 2. I need a 2 to win. Like, but do you really need a 2, though? Like, no, I need a 2. It's the only way to win. So, kids are going to be kids. You got to take a little bit of a minute to cool off. So he takes a minute to cool off, and we sit down, like, okay, here, take her tile away here. Let's go ahead and look at this again. So, you said that you have no way to win, right? Right. Like, I agree, you don't have a way to win right here. But, how can you make it so that she doesn't win either? Like, I can't. I don't have the 2. We're like, no. That means that you can't win. That doesn't mean that she wins. Like, well, what do you mean? Like, where does she have to put that 2 in order to win? Where does that go? And that little devious smile that just spread across his face when he realized he could just block her turn instead of taking the win right now. That sudden realization of how strategy worked. Like, it was such a golden moment to see. It was like, that's usually what it comes down to. It's this kind of realization that you don't have to win right now. You don't have to win in the most optimal sense. You don't have to. Essentially, the win doesn't have to be in a perfect scenario. In many ways, like, the main benefit of a genre like this is the fact that you can have those situations where the wins are weird, and those are the more satisfying ones to get. Like those moments when there was really no reason for you to be able to win, but you ended up going and doing what seems like some cheesy bullshit in a way to actually pull it off. It's what makes challenge running, this entire genre and stuff like that, so dang fun. Hell, even in games like, if you've ever played Sword of the Stars, The Pit, that actually revel in having completely unfair RNG, there's still innately, whether it was intentional or not, there's still enough actual solid mechanics there to make it so that, realistically speaking, you can still consistently get wins on anything other than its impossible difficulty. Well, actually not impossible. Even impossible is actually possible, or insanity, rather, is possible. It's actually just seriously that actually can potentially just fully RNG screw you. But that's just due to how much stuff is stacked against you, and it's literally a difficult beyond impossible, or difficulty beyond impossible, sorry. So, kind of, what you're getting into in that particular case. But either way, like in that case, like let's say there's these wormhole traps that you'll see many new players complaining about. They're like, well, it's unfair. This wormhole trap will create a situation where I am warped several floors below. Like, okay, that's a problem because you don't know where you're going to land, and that's not necessarily going to help you out here, right? Okay, so we take a look at this wormhole trap and like, what can we do to interact with it? Like, well, on the surface level, we can just go up and attempt to disarm it. Realistically, most folks don't invest in traps, but if they knew to invest in traps, it certainly would be a way for them to win. But most won't end up investing in traps. So essentially, their option is to go and interact with it in some way. If they do, more than likely, they'll end up failing, they'll end up triggering the thing, and they'll take its full effect. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Because that's kind of the question here. If a player, for example, sorry again, if, for example, they're stuck in a situation where, they are getting completely overwhelmed, as they do in that game. You can potentially wind up getting chased around the map by like 100 dudes that you can't actually fight. You basically can no longer escape through the means that you came from, and in many cases you're just kind of looking to adapt a way out of that, out of whatever mess you got yourself stuck into. It's entirely a game designed around trying to get yourself out of a permanent softlock, more or less. Also, sorry that the sound is going weird. I think that's because I ended up bumping the dock a little bit. Anyway, so that is, again, intrinsic to the design of that game. However, if, let's say, a player is suddenly paying attention and they see, okay, I read over the description for wisdom here, and it helps me to go and kind of detect where traps are on the ground. Okay, that's pretty handy. That's useful information to have. Doesn't really necessarily help me in terms of disarming it, but I know that it's there. So if, for example, I know that I'm getting chased by a gigantic mob I can't actually beat, this actually gives me two potential options for dealing with it. I might be able to go run that mob into the trap itself in order to then throw them down several floors, or I might potentially just go and use it myself to just escape. At the same time, you don't actually have to be close. It's actually a very cheap investment to go get something like telekinesis. It's typically only a couple levels worth of investment in order to be able to mess with stuff at long range. So you get a hold of that, and again, stuff changes. Where now, instead of simply relying on random chance, now you know that, okay, now I don't have to be close. I know that I can be fairly far away. I can safely trigger the trap and try to disarm it. Like, okay, so you disarm it, but then what? Well, then you carry it with you. Like, your odds of placing it down are fairly low, but now you have an instant escape button wherever you are. And all of this randomness is just basically a way to say, okay, the less likely stuff can potentially be very, very valuable. It might be exactly what you need in a particular situation, so it might really be worth considering, that maybe it's just directly telling you what's valuable and what isn't. That it's not simply the only way to succeed, it's, a potential tool in your tool belt, a way to direct you towards what's important and what isn't. And this is actually one of those design changes that I really, really, really appreciated with Tactics Ogre Reborn as opposed to the PSP version, because it had a real problem in that particular department. Because in the original PSP version, a lot of times you had the total opposite of this taking place, where, let's say, you had a skill that had fairly little value, but also had very low chances to actually succeed, which led to a lot of confusion over what mattered and what didn't. And again, I'm just really glad that they ended up changing it in this one, so that, for example, when you have your debuffs, if you put on Spell Strike, it can't get completely wiped out. It can't just be, wiped out of existence there. I don't know why I'm picking up another skill card other than just to have another skill card. But, like, if you have a Spell Strike, it's always going to be at least 30%, which is valuable information. It's just valuable to know that that 30% will always be there. Giving you those odds that this is something that you want to keep on hand, that this is something that you want to pay attention to, that it has a guarantee associated with it. Sorry, my throat is really giving out. I really should probably just kind of wrap up this rant here. My point is, for every game that I've ever seen, whenever going and learning new mechanics or what have you, it's always, always, always been very useful information to go pay attention to what the RNG is trying to say. Because it always seems to have a message, it always seems to, even if subconsciously, even if the game wasn't intentionally designed in a way that, in a way to convey that particular information, it's still something that they will always end up pointing out, whether on purpose or not, as far as just, like, this is important, this isn't. If this is guaranteed, if this is an absolutely guaranteed thing, it's probably not necessarily going to stretch that hard, but if you can guarantee something that does not normally have a guarantee, there's probably some real value behind that. Again, see debuff weapons in this one, or the debuff breath spells off of the dragons, or, for example, the way that auto skills are set up. The fact that they will directly just be like, okay, look, this is just really important, that you can suddenly get this this debuff that otherwise didn't have much of a shot to work, to go and work. I don't know why I'm trying to stun that guy. I'm pretty sure he's stun-proofed. Anyway, so that's about that. So y'all have yourselves a good one. Hopefully this was a helpful little ramble rant kind of thing here. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. There's actually a lot of indie projects that are going to be coming up really soon, including one that made me completely add a entire new franchise to the list that I absolutely have to get to. So either way, a lot of really good stuff on its way here. Just kind of hopefully when I'm able to talk a little bit better. So looking forward to doing all that. Thank you guys for sticking by, especially over the course of last year. It's been quite a lot of growth overall this time. And yeah, y'all take care. I'll see you later.